We're going to transition very quickly, but if you'd like to get a coffee, by all means, it is that time of the day when you need a coffee, but we think we're also going to be able to keep you awake. After that very inspiring session we just had, and I'm still sort of absorbing some of it. I have, you know, like all of us, I think to hear the story of Kofi and everyone in their own words is very powerful. And I'm very frustrated we couldn't, visa keeps people apart. But anyway, this next panel, what we're going to do is we're going to take the wisdom and the insight that was generated by the previous panel, and we're going to now think about it in the context of international organizations and what we can do, because the question is, what can we do now? We just heard about governments losing willingness to stay focused on people living with leprosy, with Hansen's disease, and I am joined by a very activist and just fantastic panel of colleagues and friends. I think I've already introduced myself as David Edwards, General Secretary of EI, and you've heard from some of Education International's members and leaders who I like to call wisdom workers. I like to refer to teachers in this particular moment in time as wisdom workers. I say that because you accumulate knowledge, but you distill wisdom through experience, through your values, and through your relationships that your colleagues bring. Okay? And what I just heard in that previous panel that I think Taka very ably moderated was a call to action and a call to the wisdom workers of the world. 33 million educators, you heard it, 180 countries, almost 400 organizations in Education International. And I was really pleased to hear Education International's leaders from Indonesia and from Ghana and India picking up the call, picking up the mantle, hearing that and thinking about how this relates to our own fight for inclusion, our own values as teachers, as trade unionists, to make sure that schools are welcoming, that communities are welcoming environments, and that nobody, regardless of a disease they have, a disability they have, should be excluded or laughed at or made to feel less than. And I always say that those who know me know that I like to talk about teachers need tools, time, and trust. And in the context of this conversation, I'm going to add another T, truth. Because I think one of the things I heard in that previous panel was the need for truth, for information, at a time where some talk about post-truth, and where certain factions are trying to separate us and make us scared of each other. It's up for the teachers of the world and our partners in organizations like those here on the stage with me to really get down to the hard work, creating the conditions at the global level for the time, truth, for the tools, time, truth, and trust that we need to be able to move this forward. So it's a real pleasure for us. So again, I don't think there's too much I need to say in terms of Education International's commitment to inclusion. My colleagues know about that. But I think in terms of actually combating stigma, we could do more. And I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleagues about ways that we can collaborate at the global level so that we can both draw attention to the needs of people living with leprosy and hear about some of the ways that both at the school level as teachers, but also teacher trade unions are instrumental in pushing governments. We're in every community in the world in terms of influencing communities to think more openly and actually bring information and truth so that we can end the stigma wherever it exists. So as we begin our panel, and I hope I've spoken slowly enough for my dear, dear, dear interpreters, who I love very much, and sometimes they talk to me after I do these things about slowing down a little bit, so I'm going to use that cue to slow down a little bit. But for my panelists to please also speak slowly so that they can understand you, and those our our colleagues who are online can follow and benefit. We are also taping this. We will also be sharing these panels with our members via our website and YouTube. But I'd like to start with Chris Castle, who has come to us from UNESCO's Division for Peace and Sustainable Development. And I've known Chris for a very long time. I'm very impressed with his work. And Chris, UNESCO, as the lead UN agency for education, which has a unique mandate, particularly now, to promote the right to inclusive education worldwide. I was wondering if you might be able to share one key approach or tool that UNESCO uses to address stigma and discrimination, and maybe how this approach has been, or how it could be, applied to improve the situation of persons affected by Hansen's disease. Over to you, Chris, please.
Thanks very much, David. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it's great to be on a panel with you as well. As you say, we've known each other for many years, and it's great to be at an event with all the partners who are here today talking about this very important issue. And we're especially pleased to be invited to talk about the role of education and how we can address the very challenging issue of stigma and discrimination in and through education. And today we're, of course, focusing particularly on Hansen's disease, but we've also had references to other diseases and other forms, other issues that bring about stigma and discrimination and why that's important. And I guess in response to your specific question, David, I think, you know, one approach that we regularly use for a range of things is the whole school approach. And I'm sure a number of people, and especially EI colleagues, are familiar with that. But it basically reminds us that one of the most effective ways for us to address challenges in education is by getting everybody involved. And while teachers are at the center of that, and for understandable reasons, we also need other education staff. We need everybody in the school, the community, the parents, and the learners themselves to be engaged in order to have an effective response to a particular challenge, and that includes stigma and discrimination. But I also want to say that I do think we have more tools in our toolbox than just one particular approach. And one of the things that strikes us at UNESCO is that wouldn't it be wonderful if we were all investing in the 4 T's that you talked about, David? If we were investing in teacher training, supporting teachers, trusting them, giving them the time for everything that they do, so that whether it's addressing stigma and discrimination associated with Hansen's disease, or only a few short years ago, and still in some countries today, children living with HIV who experience stigma and discrimination, children living with disabilities, children affected by other diseases. Wouldn't it be great if we were just investing in education systems? Because there really is a common foundation across the board for all of these things. And then, of course, specific information related to Hansen's disease and having testimonials from people living with Hansen's disease is critically important, as we've seen in this meeting here today. But just providing those testimonies and just providing information about how a disease might be transmitted, it's important to know that, and teachers have a critical role to play in making sure that we transmit accurate, scientific-based, evidence-based information. But information alone will not get the job done. We know that over and over and over again, because even when accurate information is provided, it doesn't necessarily lead to behavior change. It doesn't necessarily change people's attitudes and behaviors that reinforce and perpetuate really harmful stigma and discrimination. And so that points to the need for example, effective pedagogies. We need to have social and emotional learning, which is another critical, important tool in our toolbox. We need to invite affected communities into the classroom to share their lived experience, like the testimonials that we've heard today, so that it really brings home what it means, and that there are safe spaces for learners to ask questions and learn, rather than just sitting and being passive recipients of information. In fact, one of the things that I'm most proud of in the last couple of years since the UN Summit on Transforming Education in 2022 is that I really feel like finally we started to recognize that learners are active, they need to be actively involved in the education that they receive. They're not just lucky beneficiaries of education, it's their right. And we need to start involving learners in having a say in the education that they want and that they demand. And we've seen that time and time again on a range of issues. And when they have an opportunity to express what they expect and what they demand, I think that's when we really start to see meaningful results. And I would argue that the same is true when we talk to learners and say, what do you think about stigma and discrimination? Why do you think this happens? Why would this in some way be harmful? Both in the classroom, but also online. We've seen how incredibly harmful online stigma and discrimination and violence can be. And schools and education and teachers have a really important role in educating learners about the online world, which is an increasingly important part of a child's life. And so the more we can help them understand why their behavior matters offline and online is also a really important role for teachers. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate that. That was very insightful. Okay, so let's stay with let's stay with tools for a second. So Pascal, who is Pascal Barniche, the Damien Foundation General Director and our partner in this event. It's very nice to be able to partner with you, Pascal. You have developed here in Belgium a toolkit for teachers, correct? And I know that you're working around the world, that the Damien Foundation is working around the world to also fight stigma, doing research, working with teachers. And I was just wondering if maybe to help us sort of understand what that looks like from a national perspective in terms of the toolkit itself, but then also maybe you could speak a little bit like Chris did about education's power in terms of unlocking that power. How we unlock education's power is probably the better way to say it, to reduce stigma and discrimination. Pascal.
Thank you, David. Yeah, the Damien Foundation is mainly a medical organization, and we're working on those medical programs in 13 countries across the world. However, since the start of the organization 60 years ago, we have started to build a very strong collaboration with schools in Belgium. And so my focus is going to be on that part of our actions now. So yeah, we've already discussed about the Damien Foundation, how we mix actions, research, etc. But what we're doing through that education program in Belgium is that recognizing that education plays indeed a central role in improving health. And for that, children need to understand what is a disease, how do we prevent a disease, how we treat it, and how we challenge prejudice as well that are caused, that often accompany those diseases. So we have been one of the first NGO in Belgium to partner with schools, as I said earlier, and we address the health as more of a global health issues. When we started, our aim was twofold. We were doing sensitization in the schools with teachers, strongly collaborating with them and their classroom, but that sensitization was also leading to action. And so we organized meetings between classroom and people, communities that were affected by leprosy, etc. Now, that engagement also led to fundraising for the organization. Now we are definitely much more focused on education and global education itself. So our education program has been adapted also to fully align with teachers' needs and the reality of today's classroom, and also the reality that we're facing in the different countries where we're operating. I mean, we know that our colleague from Ghana could not be here for visa issue. We do have the same issue on the other way, and we're also facing security issues in the countries where we're working, which makes it more and more difficult to organize those the exchanges that we had in person. Although that was very powerful, definitely, to sensitize the children. So in practice now, we have developed tools that are playful, flexible, and designed to fit within the framework of global citizenship. In practice, schools receive a portfolio, and the teacher can then choose what fits his classroom best within that portfolio. It gives insight, it gives context about leprosy and global health issues, and beyond barrier to access health or stigma and discrimination. We also provide videos. We have different videos that are adapted to the different age of the students. So we have cartoons and we have short movies. We also have a game with cards that is a playful approach to barrier to access healthcare. So our focus is definitely sharing a conviction that we are all citizens of the world. And as citizens, we all live at some point of our lives some kind of exclusion, some kinds of stigmatization. So we rely to that experience by students to explain how stronger or how different also could be the discrimination that is faced by people affected by leprosy. The program invites students to talk openly about the topic, about unfairness, inequality, stigma, and to reflect on the values that shape a more equitable society. So, by discovering those realities, we hope that children learn to challenge the prejudices, to challenge beliefs that exist here in Belgium. They begin to understand that access to healthcare is not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed in other countries, but it's more and more difficult in Belgium as well. They also learn about scientific concepts, about patient-centered care, and about the discrimination that still affects people with certain diseases. So this is in a nutshell our folder, the package that we propose to children. You see the folder, Santé Exclusion, Brisons les barrières, that is giving teachers insight and context. The different cartoons and movies are downloadable on our website. And we have different packages for first and second grade, primary school, etc. on to, if I'm not wrong, 7th and 8th grade. So each component supports teacher in guiding students towards awareness, empathy, and responsible citizenships. This invites young people to look at the world, its challenges, its inequalities, but also its potential. And it helps them to ask the right questions and encourages them to imagine the role they want to play as engaged citizen in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. And I was quite struck, and it's kind of for the audience of teachers, who we get a lot put on us in terms of toolkits and portfolios, but actually giving them tools, a portfolio that they can choose, use their own professional discretion to decide what's the most appropriate thing, and trusting them to do that, I think is really, really important. And so it's great to hear that. Oh, my good friend Tom van der Bosch is here from VVOB Belgium. I was just reminiscing back to seeing you at one of our World Congresses. I don't know which one it was. I think it was Bangkok. It was in Bangkok. Tom sat in the front row for the whole World Congress. I don't know if anyone did that, but Tom did that. And it's a real pleasure to have Tom, because we have at EI and VVOB have collaborated over a very long time together. And Tom travels the world a lot like I do, and they have a focus on promoting inclusive education, addressing exclusion, links to vulnerability and disadvantage. Worked a lot with teachers, but Africa, Asia, South America. And I was just curious, from your perspective, Tom, if you could talk a little bit about some of the most successful approaches, strategies, or tools that VVOB has used in advancing this agenda, and perhaps maybe also what lessons might we be able to distill, to draw for supporting students and teachers affected by Hansen's disease. Tom, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, David, and really a pleasure to be here, and thank you to the organizers, Education International, Sasakawa Foundation, and Damien Foundation as well. As I was reflecting on preparing for this event, I was thinking, when did I hear as a person first about leprosy? I'm born and raised here in Belgium, though I now work globally, but it was indeed in school that I learned first about leprosy. And I'm so happy to see that toolkit here today, because we learned in school, that was in the, long time ago, I will release the information, it was in the 80s. So we learned in school about leprosy in the subject of religious education. So it was indeed Father Damien who went to that Molokai island and helped patients, and then did his good things, and finally also had to give his life for that. The problem was we only learned about that in that subject of religious education. We were not taught anything about this disease in science or in social studies, so it was just limited to one teacher in one particular class with a particular, very old-fashioned viewpoint, of course. We would think it's a very contagious disease, which it is not if you don't also address that in science. So very happy to see that such toolkits exist. And what we see also around the world is when we work with teachers and school leaders, our work focuses on teachers and school leaders and the institutions supporting them, is that it has to be an approach which includes all teachers of all subjects. So it should not be limited to just one particular subject like science or social studies, but you can teach these things, and you can teach in an inclusive way across the curriculum. Even in mathematics, you can easily discuss statistics, for instance, on why are there certain percentages of certain diseases in certain countries or part of the country. That is actually a mathematical question. You can draw graphs about that. In arts, you can have paintings, drawings, you can have in languages, poems, stories. So you have so many opportunities as a teacher to address this, and that's very exciting when you can work with those issues as a team of teachers. One approach that we have seen that is quite successful in many countries around the world is working through professional learning communities of teachers, where teachers come together, discuss issues, come with their own agenda for the professional learning communities, and come with their own solutions. And that is part of giving them that trust, of course. Trusting teachers. Teachers know best what is at hand, and especially when they work together. This can be professional learning communities within their school, or can be across schools. Also, what we have seen is that school leadership really matters. School leaders, they set the tone and the culture of a school. So they also need their support and support systems. We have recently started an African Center for School Leadership, realizing that potential of effective school leaders. And school leaders, they need their own support. It's not just a promoted teacher. They need specific skills and attitudes to be able to be an effective school leader. So it's a gap which is often still forgotten. Then when we look at the teachers, it's not just about indeed technical knowledge and information. Nowadays you can get that easily, but it's also about mindsets. So changing mindsets. If you want to change mindsets, you have to do that across the system, starting from initial teacher education in universities or at teacher training colleges. And then very important, induction programs for new teachers, newly qualified teachers. In their first year or their first 2 years in school, that is what really sets their mindsets, and many young teachers will even drop out of the profession because they don't get the professional guidance, counseling, support from more experienced teachers, from their school leaders, from their immediate environment to basically address some of the issues that they face in their first few years in the profession, especially in systems where they are not exposed to teaching practice during their initial teacher education. And then, of course, after induction, the continuous professional development and support to teachers through, for instance, professional learning communities, which is a low-cost and very effective approach. Having said that, we see also in many contexts that we expect a lot of teachers. Teachers are expected to be a teacher, of course, and that's the most important, to have that teaching and learning happening in the classroom. Then they are often overloaded with a lot of administrative requirements. Then they are expected to be a coach, they are expected to be a mentor, in some cases they are expected to be a nurse, when we talk about medical issues, even a doctor, support in different ways. And that is just overloading teachers and expecting too much from teachers. So you should also have a support system around these teachers so that you can make referrals, so that you can get extra information when you need that you can get access to that psychologist when the teacher doesn't have all of these skills to address those. So some of these lessons that we have learned in inclusive and equitable education systems can also definitely be used in the issues we are talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Bedankt. Thank you very much. We always talk about professional collaboration, but I was thinking, as you were speaking about sort of collaborative professionalism, seemed what you were actually describing. Mindsets, mentoring, support systems, all very important and absolutely essential. Now, I'm going to turn to Paula Brandão, who's going to be a respondent to our panel, and then I'm going to come back. I think we're going to have time to come back to take another bite at the apple. But as I was reading Paula's bio, my mother's a nurse, so shout out to my mom, who I think is watching online. But I have a lot of respect for the nursing profession and our colleagues as teachers with nurses. We're in the care profession in many ways, but also a professor and researcher at the College of Nursing in Rio de Janeiro. As a person affected by Hansen's disease, she has been an active volunteer in a number of organizations fighting for the rights of persons affected by the diseases, as well as collaborating with health workers and their communities. So Paula, after listening to these presentations, these insights, I'm curious to know what stood out most to you. And from your perspective as a nurse, educator, you have a lot of hats, researcher, a person affected by Hansen's disease. What are the lessons we can draw from these approaches? And if I can ask a follow-up to that, we can keep these all straight. What are the practices that you believe are the most meaningful and effective in supporting persons affected by Hansen's disease and in challenging the stigma and discrimination at the levels of both community, institutions, and sort of policy levels? Paula, over to you. Obrigado.
Thank you, David. At the first, I thank you, the Sasakawa Health Foundation, the Damian Foundation, and the Education International to invited me to Global Appeal. Do you know I speak Portuguese, but I try to speak in English here. My name is Paula Brandão. I'm from Brazil, and when I was 22 years old, my life changed because I was diagnosed with Hansen's disease. I was in the final semester of nursing degree when I began to feel a strange numbness in a small area of my leg. A professor examined me with care and referred me to health service. Being welcomed by a professor made all the difference in my life. After several tests, the diagnosis was confirmed. We had caught the disease early, but even so, fear and the uncertainty took hold of me. I went through the same words that so many people affected by Hansen's disease face. I completed 6 months of treatment and I was cured. But the cure did not shield me from stigma. And almost 4 years after being cured, I faced another painful moment because I Hansen's disease reaction, now known as neuritis, in my ulnar nerve. I lost part of strength in my left hand. I needed long-term strong medications, endured their side effects, and at times questioned whether I was truly healed. In 2004, I got to know the movement for the reintegration of persons affected by Hansen's disease in Brazil. I became a volunteer and, over the years, one of the movement's leaders. I shared my story publicly, worked with the Women's Department, and joined the national leadership, carrying the voice of persons affected by Hansen's disease into conversations with the government and other organizations. I was born and raised in a poor family. My parents never had the chance to finish school. So greatest inheritance they gave me and my brother was the belief that education could change our lives. And it did. Education and Hansen's disease transformed me. I studied at a public and free university. Today, one of the top 80 in Brazil, the State University of Rio de Janeiro. It is the same institution where I now proudly help train new nurses. Thank you. I became a family and community nurse, dedicating myself to vulnerable populations, neglected disease, and communities affected by urban violence. I completed my master's and PhD at Fiocruz, one of Brazil's most respected research institutions. Through every challenge, my family stood by me, celebrating its victory as if it were their own. But I know my story is not the reality for most persons affected by Hansen's disease. Many have little or not access to education. This limits early diagnosis, increases the risk of disabilities, and deepens the wounds of stigma and discrimination. Girls and women suffer even more, facing gender-based violence, rejection, and cultural barriers that keep them away from school and healthcare. Every person affected by Hansen's disease deserves to have their rights recognized, and education is one of the most powerful of those rights. Paulo Freire, the patron of education in Brazil, once said, "Education does not transform the world, but it transforms people who will transform the world." I carry this truth with me. I still believe we can change the world. To achieve this, we must remember that the teachers and the students are agents of transformation. Strategies to address stigma and discrimination against the people affected by Hansen's disease in the educational system must view schools as protective spaces for children and young people. Since institutions are made of people, it is essential to invest in education, training, and daily practice, recognizing that they reflect traditional models and the communities they come from. These strategies must consider local culture, intersectionalities, gender, class, and race, and the social determinants, access to health services, employment, income, food, housing, leisure, safety, and religious practice. The life stories of affected individuals, their families, and their communities help identify stigma and guide effective responses. In universities, translating research into accessible knowledge is crucial. Projects should connect universities and research institutes with affected communities and professionals in education, health, social assistance, and justice. As researchers and educators, we must avoid tokenism, merely consulting affected people, and instead ensure their meaningful participation in decision-making in research and education. This is about self-determination, empowerment, emancipation, and genuine civic participation. Thank you, everyone, for listening, for helping us transform the world of persons affected by Hansen's disease. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so very much. So we just have a little bit of time. So I'm going to do the impossible and ask you to keep it to just 1 minute. Nanri, where are you? And then I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to say a few words and then we're going to close. We have a reception upstairs after this. Not on the roof, but out there and up. But I'd like you to the extent you can, listening to this, distilling it through your own experience and your own knowledge and wisdom, what is one thing that you think is the most important thing that we need to do right now at the global level in order to be able to advance what we just started here? And keeping in mind you're speaking to teachers around the world and educators around the world and education unionists around the world. We'll start with Chris, and we'll just kind of come right across. And this is sort of a parting thought. Call to action, but reflection. What do we need to do? What do you think is, Chris, over to you, please.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, but look, I'm struck by the consistency of the messages that I think all of us shared on the panel. It's clear that we know what to do, and it's clear that the voices of those directly affected are consistent as well. So I would say we have to invest in education systems so education systems can deliver in order to combat stigma and discrimination on Hansen's disease and on other forms of stigma and discrimination.
Thank you. Go public fund education. To my Education International colleagues, they heard that loud and clear. Thank you, Chris. Pascal.
Well, I think for all of us, addressing stigma and discrimination in the classroom is of the essence. It's an evidence. It's an open door. However, let's not be naive. I mean, we've talked about time, and the feedback we get from teachers here in Belgium is that they don't have time anymore to invest into our toolkit, into addressing that with the classroom. And there are a lot of people out there that are closing our door because, and they're restricting funding for public services, be it health or education, and that is an issue. So thanks to the Sasakawa Health Foundation, thanks to Education International and the way that we've collaborating to organize this, we have voiced this. Now we have a year until the next global appeal, I hope, Mr. Sasakawa. So let's use that word to echo this voice and to echo it loud, because the people that are closing the door are pretty loud. So yeah, I think we definitely need to continue this conversation and make our voices louder.
Thank you very much. And I know my colleagues from the Belgian Teachers Trade Union, who was actually on the streets about funding just this weekend, agrees with you. We need more investment, we need more respect, and hopefully you guys can get a drink afterwards and we can help figure this out. As a Belgian, I'm also interested in that. Tom.
I like events like this one because we are all convinced. We can have a nice drink after this event. We can all agree. But what I'm struggling with is how am I going to not even convince the Minister of Education, because you can also convince the Minister of Education. She understands. But how are we going to convince a parliament? How are we going to convince a Minister of Finance? That's what I'm really struggling with. But what I learned today is that these stories are so valuable. Stories from people with lived experiences. Stories also from what is happening in classrooms, what teachers are already doing. Most people, it doesn't really matter on which side of the political spectrum we are on, but most people do care about children because we either all have children or grandchildren or nieces in school, and we leave them in schools for a lot of time. So we know as parents and as stakeholders that that is where the difference can be made. And sometimes I hope we could go back even to the COVID times, because at that time, I saw like a bit more respect even for the teaching profession, for what was happening in schools. Although schools were not open, teachers were really appreciated for what they were trying to do. So I'm trying to get see, how can I now convince not all of you at the reception and the nice drinks we will have, but how can we convince jointly the others that we need to convince?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. And finally, last but absolutely not least, Paula, and thank you again for making the journey to be here. And just like Tom was talking about the stories, yours is a very powerful story, and I think has affected all of us. We'd like to hear from you.
Now I speak in Portuguese.
Does anyone need a
It's
headphone?
more comfortable for me. Eu agradeço em nome de todas as pessoas afetadas pela hanseníase por nos ouvirem, por estar aqui nesse momento, neste evento. Acho que é importante que todos que estão aqui, como boa professora, levem o dever de casa, né? The homework. Yes. E isso é importante para nós, porque eu acredito que essa é um pouco da função do apelo global, de que todos nós que aqui estamos e somos líderes, ou em nossas comunidades como pessoas afetadas em nossos países, mas tantos líderes globais, esse é o momento de trazer à tona um tema que não pode ser esquecido. Paulo Freire tinha uma frase também que dizia o seguinte: nós aprendemos ao ensinar e ensinamos ao aprender. E isso, para o professor, é fundamental que ele tenha isto na cabeça. E aos líderes, é extremamente importante que tenham na cabeça esta frase também. Porque no momento em que cada um de vocês que aqui está leva o dever de casa, é a primeira parte de fazermos essa transformação do mundo. O investimento em que cada organização pode ter na educação de crianças, adolescentes, jovens e adultos, professores ou estudantes, na construção de uma mudança de mundo e eliminação do estigma e da discriminação às pessoas afetadas. Muito obrigada.
Muito obrigado. Muito obrigado. Wonderful. And I loved, and for all my fellow educators, we all love Paulo Freire very much. And thank you for bringing him here. We have a pedagogical movement. We have the Freire movement, that's Education International. And that spoke to all of our hearts. And I know that my Brazilian colleagues who are watching online, they were sending me messages. So you'll have lots to talk about when you get back to Rio with them, I'm sure. Colleagues, can you please join me with thanking this incredible panel for sharing with us and helping us? Thank you so much.